I, 62, F. Always believed that family was a circle of strength, founded on love and mutual respect. My late husband, David, and I built our lives on that principle. We raised our son, Mark, to understand its importance. For 35 years, our home was a place of warmth, laughter, and unconditional support. When David passed away 5 years ago, the silence was deafening, but the love we had built remained. Mark was my rock, and when he married Sarah, I welcomed her with an open heart, ready to extend that circle to include her. I saw her not as a daughter-in-law, but as the daughter I never had. I thought we were building a new kind of family, one that would honor the past while creating a beautiful future. I was wrong. The love, it turned out, was conditional. The respect was a currency I was expected to pay for. And the circle of strength had a gate, and Sarah held the only key. The annual family picnic was always David's favorite day of the year. After he was gone, I kept the tradition alive. It was a day for everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins, to gather under the old oak tree in the community park, the same one where David had proposed to me. It was supposed to be a day of joy, of remembering him and celebrating the family he cherished. But for the past few years, it had become a stage for Sarah's quiet manipulations. It started with small things. She would forget to bring a chair for me, leaving me to sit on a lumpy patch of grass. She would pack my favorite potato salad in a container she knew I couldn't open due to my arthritis. My son, Mark, never seemed to notice. Or, if he did, he chose to say nothing. He would just give me a helpless little shrug, his eyes pleading with me not to make a fuss. For his sake, I never did. I would smile, thank her for the food I couldn't eat, and find a friendly cousin to help me with my chair. I told myself these were simple oversights, the scattered thoughts of a busy young mother. I was lying to myself. This year felt different. The tension was thicker, a humid blanket that settled over our checkered picnic blanket. Sarah had been cold to me all week. My calls to Mark went to voicemail. When I asked if I could see my grandchildren, Lily and Tom, she had a ready excuse. Lily had a cough. Tom had a school project.
It was always something.
At the picnic, she made a show of serving everyone else before me. She handed a plate to my sister, Susan, then to Mark's uncle, then to a distant cousin I barely knew. I sat waiting, my hands folded in my lap, feeling a familiar sting of humiliation. Mark saw it. I know he did. He caught my eye for a fraction of a second before looking away, busying himself with pouring a drink for his wife. That glance told me everything. He knew it was deliberate, and he was choosing her side. He was choosing to let his mother be treated like an unwanted guest. The final straw came during a game of charades. My grandson, Tom, was acting out a movie, his little face scrunched in concentration. Everyone was laughing, shouting out guesses. For a moment it felt like old times. I shouted, "Is it the Lion King?" Tom's face lit up. He nodded furiously. I felt a surge of warmth. It was a simple, happy moment. Sarah, however, did not look happy. She was standing with a few of her friends she had invited, her arms crossed. Her smile was a thin, tight line. She waited until the laughter died down, then she turned to her friend, but spoke loudly enough for me to hear every single word. "She's always got to be the center of attention," she said. Her friend murmured something in response. Sarah then looked directly at me. Her voice was clear and cold, cutting through the warm afternoon air. "You know," she said, addressing the group but aiming her words at me like daggers, "we should really think about the guest list for next year. Keep it to immediate family. People who actually contribute." She paused, letting the silence hang. Then she delivered the final blow. She turned her head slightly, her eyes locking with mine. "So, Helen," she said, using my first name like a weapon, "I guess what I'm saying is you're not invited next year." The world seemed to stop. The chirping of birds, the distant laughter of children, it all faded into a dull roar in my ears. I felt the eyes of my family on me. My sister Susan looked horrified. Mark's uncle shifted uncomfortably. My son, Mark, just stared at the ground, his face pale. He said nothing. Not a single word in my defense. In that moment, the years of small slights, of feeling pushed aside and tolerated, all came crashing down. This was not an oversight. This was a public execution of my place in this family. A declaration that I was no longer welcome in the life I had helped build. I felt a strange calm settle over me. The hurt was there, a deep, aching wound. But underneath it was something else. It was a cold, hard resolve. I had spent years trying to keep the peace for Mark's sake. I had absorbed the insults, ignored the disrespect, and pretended not to see the deliberate cruelty. I did it because I loved my son, and I didn't want to put him in the middle. But I realized, looking at his face, that he was already in the middle, and he had chosen a side. He had chosen to stand with his wife while she publicly disowned his mother. My promise to David was to look after our son.
It was not to allow myself to be slowly erased.
I kept my expression neutral. I did not cry. I did not shout. I simply met Sarah's triumphant gaze. This is happening, I thought. She is finally doing it out in the open. I had a choice. I could shrink away in shame, or I could stand up for myself, for the memory of my husband, and for the dignity they were trying to strip from me.
I decided right then.
I would not be small. I would not be silent. Not anymore. I reached into my handbag, my movements slow and deliberate. Everyone was watching. Sarah's smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a flicker of confusion. What was I doing? I felt for the crisp, folded papers I had brought with me. My lawyer had given me a fresh copy of my last will and testament just last week. I had brought it for a reason I hadn't even admitted to myself until now. It was my last line of defense. My only remaining piece of power in a family that had taken everything else. I pulled the document from my bag. It was 8 pages stapled together. I also pulled out a black ink pen. The click of the pen echoed in the sudden, complete silence of the picnic. I unfolded the will on my lap.
I didn't need to read it.
I knew every word by heart. David and I had written it together. It outlined how everything we had worked for our entire lives would pass to our son, Mark, and his family. It was a document of love, of legacy. But love and legacy had to be earned. They had to be respected. I flipped to page 4, to the section detailing the inheritance for Mark and Sarah. I looked up, first at my son, whose eyes were wide with a dawning horror.
Then I looked at Sarah.
Her face was a mask of disbelief. She had expected tears. She had expected a scene. She had not expected this. You are right, Sarah, I said, my voice steady and clear. It is important to be clear about who is family and who is not. I uncapped the pen. With a firm, steady hand, I drew a thick black line through her name. Then I drew another line through the entire paragraph that left the house and the savings to Mark without condition. I made a note in the margin. Everything to be placed in a trust for Lily and Tom. Inaccessible to Mark and Sarah, I signed and dated the amendment right there. I folded the will, capped the pen, and placed them both back in my handbag. I stood up, brushing the grass from my skirt. Thank you for clarifying my position, I said to her. You have made things very simple. I turned and walked away, leaving behind the smoking ruins of the family I once thought I had. The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The walk back to my car was a blur. My legs felt unsteady, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. The shock of my own actions was wearing off, replaced by a profound sense of release. It was as if I had been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time, and I had finally set it down. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see their faces. I didn't want to see the fallout.
Not yet.
I just needed to get away. I needed to breathe. As I drove home, the quiet of the car was a comfort. The events of the picnic replayed in my mind. Sarah's cruel words. Mark's silence. The feeling of the pen in my hand as I struck her name from our life. It was a brutal act, but it was a necessary one. It was the only language she would understand. For years, I had tried to speak the language of love, of patience, of family. She had answered me with the language of power and control. Today, I had finally answered her back in a tongue she could not ignore. When I got home, I went straight to the small desk in my living room. I took out the will again and looked at the angry black lines I had drawn. It was a messy, emotional act, but it was legally sound. My lawyer had explained that a handwritten amendment on the original document, if signed and dated, could be recognized. It was a temporary measure, of course. I would need to have it formally redrafted. But it was a start. It was a statement. As I sat there, my phone began to ring. It was Mark. I looked at his name on the screen. My son. My only child. A wave of sadness washed over me. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. And again. On the fourth try, a text message appeared. Mom, please pick up. We need to talk. Another one followed immediately. Sarah is freaking out. You can't be serious. I put the phone on silent and turned it face down on the desk. I was not ready to talk. I was not ready to hear his excuses or his justifications. For the first time in a very long time, my peace was more important than his. The betrayal hadn't started at the picnic. It had been a slow, creeping poison that had seeped into our family for years, ever since Mark married Sarah. In the beginning, I had been so happy for him. Sarah was charming, beautiful, and seemed to adore my son. I welcomed her with open arms, eager to build a relationship. I took her shopping. I shared my family recipes with her. I gave them a substantial down payment for their first house, money David and I had saved for our retirement. I wanted them to have a good start. I wanted them to be happy. Thank you so much, Helen, Sarah had said, hugging me tightly when I gave them the check. We couldn't do this without you. You're the best mother-in-law anyone could ask for. I believed her. I saw the gratitude in her eyes and felt it in her embrace. I thought we were forging a genuine bond. The first crack appeared about a year into their marriage. I had offered to host Christmas dinner, as I always had. It was a tradition David and I started, and it was important for me to continue it. A week before Christmas, Sarah called me. Hi, Helen, she said, her voice bright and cheerful. I have some wonderful news. Mark and I have decided to start our own Christmas tradition this year. We're going to host at our house. I was taken aback. Oh, I said, trying to hide my disappointment. That's lovely, dear. But I've already bought the turkey and everything. There was a brief pause. Well, you can just freeze it, she said, her tone suddenly dismissive. It's important for us as a new family to have our own things, you know? We'll see you on Christmas Day around 2-inch. She hung up before I could respond. I felt a sharp pang of hurt. It wasn't just about the dinner. It was about being pushed aside, my traditions deemed irrelevant. When I saw Mark a few days later, I tried to talk to him about it. Mark, honey, I was a little surprised about Christmas. I began gently. He immediately looked uncomfortable. Mom, it's just easier this way, he said, not meeting my eyes. Sarah really wants to do it, and it's our house. It makes sense, but it's our family tradition, I said, my voice trembling slightly. It was your father's favorite day, and we'll make new traditions, he said quickly. It's not a big deal. Please don't make it a big deal. His words were a clear message. Don't cause trouble. Don't upset Sarah. Your feelings are not as important as hers. So I didn't make it a big deal. I went to their house on Christmas Day, brought my famous apple pie, and complimented Sarah on her cooking. I smiled until my cheeks ached, all the while feeling like a guest in my own family's life. After the children, Lily and Tom, were born, things got worse. Sarah's control tightened. She used the grandchildren as leverage, a tool to manage me. If I did something that displeased her, my time with Lily and Tom would be mysteriously curtailed. I once bought Lily a dress that Sarah deemed too old-fashioned for the next month. Every time I asked to see them, Sarah would say they were busy or not feeling well. When I finally was allowed to visit, Sarah made a point of saying, "We've had a talk with Lily about accepting gifts graciously, even if they're not to her taste." The implication was clear. My gift was a burden, an object lesson in politeness. I was being punished, and my grandchild was being used as the instrument. Mark was oblivious, or pretended to be. "Sarah's just very particular about how she wants to raise them, Mom," he would say. It's her right as their mother. He never seemed to consider my rights as their grandmother. He never seemed to see the cruelty in his wife's actions. The financial requests began subtly. Mom, we're a little short this month. The car needs new tires.
Could you help us out?
Of course, I helped. It was just a few $100s. Then it was a few thousand for a new water heater. Then a larger sum for a school trip for Lily. Each time, it was an emergency, a one-off situation. They always promised to pay me back, but they never did. I never pressed the issue. It felt wrong to ask my son for money. I had more than enough since David had left me well provided for, and my only wish was to see my son and his family comfortable and secure. But I started to notice a pattern. The requests often came after I had done something to displease Sarah. The time I gently suggested that Tom might need a warmer coat for winter. The next week Mark called asking for a loan to fix a supposed plumbing leak. It felt transactional. My compliance and silence were being purchased. The real catalyst, the moment I realized this was not just thoughtlessness but a deliberate campaign, happened about 6 months before the picnic. I had been at their house, watching the kids while they went to a dinner party. While looking for a board game in the hall closet, I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers from a shelf. As I gathered them up, my eyes fell on a printout of an email. It was from Sarah to her sister. My hands trembled as I read it. I don't know how much longer I can deal with her, Sarah had written. She's always hovering, always has an opinion on how I'm raising the kids. Mark is useless. He just lets her walk all over us. I'm trying to set boundaries, but it's like she doesn't get it. The only good thing about her is her bank account. We've got another big expense coming up, the trip to Italy. So, I'm going to have to be nice to the old bat for a few more weeks until Mark can get the money out of her. Then, I'm cutting her hours with the kids again. She has to learn her place. I felt the air leave my lungs. The old bat, her bank account, cut her hours. The words were cold, clinical, and cruel. The trip to Italy. They had told me they needed money for a new roof. I stood there in the dark closet, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was all a lie. All of it. The smiles, the hugs, the "we couldn't do it without you," it was an act. A performance designed to keep the money flowing. I was not a mother. I was a resource. I was an obstacle to be managed. I quickly put the papers back, my mind racing. I wanted to confront them right there, and then. I wanted to throw her ugly words in her face. But I knew what would happen. Sarah would deny it. She would cry. She would accuse me of snooping, of trying to drive a wedge between her and Mark. And Mark, my dear, weak son, would believe her. He would choose her. I would be the villain.
So I said nothing.
I finished watching the children, gave them their baths, and read them stories. I kissed their sleeping heads, my heart aching with a love so fierce it felt like it would break me in two. As I drove home that night, I knew something had to change. I could no longer be a passive victim in the slow, painful dismantling of my own family. That was the night I called my lawyer to ask for a copy of my will. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I knew I needed to have it. It was the only part of my life they hadn't touched yet. It was the only power I had left. After that night, I started paying closer attention. I began to see the manipulation in every interaction. I started keeping a record. Not for anyone else, but for myself. I needed to see the pattern in black and white, to remind myself that I was not crazy, that I was not imagining the slights and the disrespect. I created a small notebook. I wrote down the date of every financial request and the reason they gave. March 5th, $4,000 for a new furnace. April 12th, $1,500 for summer camp deposits for the kids. May 20th, $10,000 for a down payment on a new car because theirs was unreliable. I then started to do my own quiet investigation. It was easier than I thought. A casual question to my sister, Susan, who lived in the same town as them. Did Mark mention they were having trouble with their furnace? I asked her over the phone one day. Their furnace? Susan said.
No.
In fact, Sarah was just telling me last week how glad she was they'd replaced the whole system 2 years ago. Why? Oh, no reason, I said lightly. I must have misunderstood, but my hand was shaking as I hung up the phone. The $4,000 was not for a furnace. So where did it go? My friend Carol was my lifeline during this time. She was a widow too, and she understood the complexities of family dynamics after a spouse is gone. I met her for coffee one afternoon, my notebook tucked in my purse. I hadn't told anyone about the email I had found. I was too ashamed, but I needed to talk to someone. Carol, I'm worried about Mark and Sarah's finances. I started testing the waters. They seem to be struggling. Carol gave me a long, knowing look. Are they struggling, Helen? Or are they spending? She asked gently. Her question opened the floodgates. I told her everything. The constant requests for money. The excuses. The way Sarah used the children as leverage. I didn't tell her about the email, not yet. But I told her enough. Oh, honey, she said, reaching across the table and taking my hand. This isn't about money. This is about control. She's isolating you from your son, and she's using your generosity against you. But what do I do? I asked, my voice thick with unshed tears. If I say no, I'll lose him. I'll lose the children. You're already losing them, Carol said, her voice firm but kind. You're just paying for the privilege of watching it happen. You need to stop being their bank. You need to set a boundary. Her words echoed in my head for days. A boundary. It sounded so simple, but it felt like an impossible mountain to climb. How could I say no to my own son? A few weeks later, I got my chance to test the waters. Mark called me. His voice had that familiar, slightly strained tone he used when he was about to ask for something. Hey, Mom, he said. How are you doing? We engaged in a few minutes of small talk before he got to the point. So, listen, he said. Sarah and I were thinking. You know how much the kids love the beach. We found this great little rental for a week in August, but it's a bit pricey. We were wondering if you might be able to help us out with the deposit. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment to draw a line. I don't think I can do that, Mark, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. What? He said, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. You can't? Why not? My financial situation has changed a bit. I lied. I need to be more careful with my spending. It wasn't a complete lie. My situation had changed. I was no longer willing to fund their lifestyle at the expense of my own self-respect. The backlash was immediate. Changed how? Mark demanded, his voice turning sharp. Dad left you more than enough. What are you spending it on? The accusation in his tone was like a slap in the face. I was being audited. I was being questioned about the money I had inherited from my own husband. That's a private matter, Mark, I said, my voice growing colder. The answer is no. Sarah is going to be so disappointed, he said, his voice laced with guilt. The kids will be heartbroken. I'm sorry to hear that, I said. And I was. I was sorry that my grandchildren were being used as pawns in their parents' financial games. But I did not back down. We ended the call on a tense, unhappy note. I felt sick to my stomach, but also a tiny flicker of pride. I had said no. I had set a boundary. The next day, I received a text from Sarah. It was a single photo of Lily and Tom looking sad. The caption read, "The kids just heard we can't go to the beach. They're devastated." It was a masterclass in manipulation. It was cruel and calculated. I looked at the photo of my beautiful grandchildren, and my resolve hardened into steel. This was not a game I was willing to play anymore. This was a war for my own survival, and I was finally starting to fight back. The weeks leading up to the annual picnic were a new kind of Cold War. My calls to Mark were met with short, clipped responses. My attempts to see the grandchildren were blocked by a wall of excuses. Sarah's public face remained pleasant enough when we saw each other at a family birthday party, but her smiles were icy, and her eyes held a new, hard glint. She was punishing me for saying no. She was making it clear that my access to the family was conditional on my compliance. It was during this time that I made a darker discovery. My sister, Susan, called me one evening, her voice low and worried. "Helen, I don't want to meddle," she started, "but I overheard something at the party and I think you should know." "What is it, Susan?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "I was in the kitchen and Sarah was talking to her mother on the phone," Susan explained. She didn't know I was there.
She was complaining about you.
She said that since you'd cut them off, they were going to have to make some changes. Changes?
I asked.
What kind of changes? She was talking about the picnic, Susan said, her voice hesitant. She said it was time to trim the fat from the guest list. She said the picnic was for people who contribute to the family, and that you were becoming a drain. She said she was going to make it clear to you, once and for all, that your role in the family was over unless you started being useful again. I felt a chill run down my spine. A drain. Useless. So this was her plan. The picnic was not just a party. It was a stage. She was planning to humiliate me publicly, to put me in my place in front of the entire family. The casual cruelty of it all was breathtaking. She wasn't just pushing me away.
She was trying to break me. She wanted to make an example out of me.
This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power. She wanted to be the matriarch. She wanted to control the family, and I was the last piece of the old guard that stood in her way. My grief for the loss of my son, for the family I thought I had, was immense. I spent a long night sitting in the dark, staring at a photograph of David and a much younger, happier Mark. I cried for the boy my son used to be. I cried for the husband who wasn't here to see what had become of us. But as the sun rose, my tears dried up. The grief remained, a dull ache in my chest, but it was now joined by a cold, clear anger. She wanted to make my role clear?
Fine.
I would make my role clear too. I would no longer be the victim. I would no longer be the silent, smiling martyr. If she wanted to use a public stage to define our relationship, then I would use it too. That was the day I decided to bring my will to the picnic. The days that followed were filled with a strange sense of purpose. I felt like I was preparing for battle. I spoke with my lawyer again, this time with more specific questions. I wanted to understand exactly what my options were. He advised me that while the handwritten amendment was a strong statement, a formally redrafted will was the only way to ensure my wishes were ironclad. He also suggested setting up a trust for the grandchildren. A trust is the safest way to protect the inheritance for Lily and Tom, he explained. You can set the terms. You can appoint a trustee who is not their parents. This will ensure that the money is used for their education and well-being, and that Mark and Sarah cannot touch a single penny of it. The idea of the trust was a revelation. It was the perfect solution. It wasn't about punishing my grandchildren. It was about protecting them. It was about ensuring that the legacy David and I had built would go to them, uncorrupted by their parents' greed and immaturity. I made an appointment with him for the week after the picnic. I was setting my pieces on the board, preparing for the final move. I also took another step. I gathered my evidence. I printed out my bank statements, highlighting every large transfer to Mark and Sarah. I wrote down the lies they had told me for each one. The furnace that was never broken. The roof that was a trip to Italy. The car repairs that coincided with the designer shopping spree Sarah had posted about on social media. I even found the email I had seen in the closet. I had taken a quick photo of it with my phone that night, a desperate, impulsive act. At the time, I didn't know why I was doing it. Now I did. I printed it out and put it with the other papers. It was a portfolio of betrayal. I didn't know if I would ever show it to anyone, but I needed it for myself. It was my proof. It was my validation. It was the anchor that would keep me from being swept away by their gaslighting and denials. I was no longer the confused, grieving widow. I was a woman with a plan. The night before the picnic, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what was going to happen. I was terrified. I was terrified of the confrontation, of the ugly words that would be said, of the final, irreparable break with my son. A part of me still wanted to back down, to call in sick, to avoid the whole thing. It would be so much easier to just fade away, to accept my diminished role, and keep the fragile peace. But then I thought of David. I thought of his strength, his integrity, his fierce love for his family. He would never have stood for this. He would never have allowed his wife to be treated with such contempt. He would have stood up for me, for our family, for what was right. And in his absence, I had to do it for myself. I owed it to him. I owed it to the life we built together. And most of all, I owed it to myself. I was not a drain. I was not useless. I was a woman who had loved and lost and survived. I was a mother and a grandmother. And I would not be erased. The day of the picnic arrived, a bright, sunny afternoon that felt like a mockery of the storm brewing inside me. As I drove to the park, my handbag sat on the passenger seat beside me. It felt heavier than usual, weighted down by the papers inside. When I arrived, the scene was just as Susan had described. It was a performance. Sarah was the gracious hostess, flitting between guests, her laughter bright and artificial. Mark was by her side, the loyal consort. They greeted me with strained smiles. "Helen, you made it," Sarah said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We saved you a spot." Over there, she pointed to a small, isolated blanket near the edge of the group, far from the main table of food and away from where the children were playing. It was a deliberate, calculated snub. The old me would have accepted it without a word. The new me just smiled. "Thank you, Sarah," I said. "But I think I'll sit over here." I walked over to the main blanket and sat down right next to my sister, Susan, who gave me a small, supportive squeeze on the arm. Sarah's eyes flashed with annoyance, but she said nothing. The first move had been made. The next hour was a tense dance. I engaged in conversation with my relatives, deliberately ignoring Sarah's attempts to control the social dynamics. She tried to steer conversations away from me. She tried to interrupt when I was telling a story. But I held my ground. I was polite, I was calm, but I was not backing down. I could feel Mark watching me, his expression a mixture of anxiety and resentment. He wanted me to just play my part, to be the quiet, agreeable mother who didn't make waves. He was about to be very disappointed. The charades game began, and I knew the moment was coming. I watched my grandson, Tom, his innocent joy a stark contrast to the ugliness that was about to unfold. When I guessed the Lion King, and his face lit up, I felt a pang of love so sharp it almost took my breath away. Everything I was about to do, I was doing for him and for his sister. Then came the moment I had been preparing for. Sarah's loud, cutting remarks to her friend. Her cold, calculated words thrown across the blanket like stones. "We should really think about the guest list for next year. Keep it to immediate family. People who actually contribute." The silence. The final, devastating blow aimed directly at my heart. "So, Helen, I guess what I'm saying is, you're not invited next year." My heart is pounding in my chest. This is it. I can feel the eyes of everyone on me. My sister's hand tightens on my arm. Mark is staring at his feet, a statue of cowardice. Sarah is looking at me, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She thinks she has won. She thinks she has finally broken me. I take a slow, deep breath. I let the silence stretch, letting her words hang in the air for everyone to absorb. I do not look away from her. "Are you sure about that, Sarah?" I ask. My voice is quiet, but it carries in the still air. Her smile wavers. This is not the reaction she expected. "Yes, I am," she says, her voice a little too sharp.
We've talked about it.
It's our family, and we get to decide who is a part of it. Our family? I repeat, still calm. That's interesting. Because for the past 5 years, it seems I've only been a part of this family when my checkbook was open. A gasp goes through the small crowd. Mark's head jerks up, his eyes wide with panic. "Mom, don't," he says, his voice a low warning. I ignore him. I am looking at Sarah. "You talk about contribution," I say, my voice gaining strength. "Let's talk about contribution. The down payment on your house. Was that a contribution? The new car? The trips you told me were roof repairs? The thousands and thousands of dollars I have given you, no questions asked, because I loved my son and I wanted his family to be happy. Was any of that a contribution?" Sarah's face has gone pale. "That's not fair," she sputters. "We were going to pay you back." "No, you were not," I say, my voice like ice. "You had no intention of paying me back. You saw me as a bank, an obstacle to be managed. An old bat whose only use was her money." The words from her email land like a physical blow. She flinches. Her eyes dart around, looking for support, but find only shocked and disapproving faces. How did you? She begins, her voice trembling. It doesn't matter how I know, I say. What matters is that I do. And you are right about one thing. It is time to be clear about who is family. It is time to be clear about contribution. I reach into my handbag. The rustle of the papers is the only sound. I pull out the will. I pull out the pen. The click echoes. This, I say, holding up the document, is my contribution. It is everything your father-in-law and I worked our entire lives to build. It was supposed to be for our son and for his family. I unfold the papers on my lap. I look at Mark. His face is ashen. Mark, I say, and for the first time, my voice breaks with the sorrow of it all. I have loved you your whole life. I would have done anything for you. But I will not stand by and watch you allow your wife to treat me with such cruelty and disrespect. Your silence today has cost you more than you can possibly imagine. He starts to speak, to protest, but I hold up a hand.
No.
It's too late for words. I look back at Sarah. Her smugness is gone, replaced by a desperate, ugly fear. You wanted me out of your future, I say to her. Congratulations. You have succeeded. But you don't get to have my past and my husband's legacy as well. I uncap the pen. With a steady hand, I draw the first black line through her name, then the second and the third, striking out the paragraph that gave them everything. I make the notation in the margin, my handwriting clear and firm. A trust for Lily and Tom, to be managed by my sister, Susan. Inaccessible to their parents, I sign my name. I date it. I stand up. The entire family is frozen, watching this unfold. I fold the will and place it carefully back into my handbag. I look at my son one last time. He looks broken. Good. He should feel a fraction of the pain he has allowed his wife to inflict on me for years. You are not invited next year? I say to Sarah, my voice low and final. Let me be clear. You are not invited ever again. You are no longer my family. I turn to my sister. Susan, would you give me a ride home? I don't feel like driving. Susan stands up immediately, her face a mixture of shock and fierce pride. Of course, Helen, she says, putting a protective arm around my shoulders. We walk away together, leaving behind the stunned silence, the shattered picnic, and the two people who had just found out what it truly means to be cut off. As we reached the edge of the park, I could hear the first sounds of a hysterical argument breaking out behind us. I did not turn around. I just kept walking. In the car, Susan was quiet for a long time. She just drove, her eyes on the road, her hand resting on my arm. Finally, she spoke. I am so proud of you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. David would have been so proud of you. I finally let the tears come. They were not tears of sadness, but of relief, of release. I cried for the years of pain, for the loss of my son, but also for the woman I had rediscovered within myself. The woman who was strong enough to fight back. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and messages. Mark called me over 20 times. He left long, rambling voicemails, alternating between anger and desperate apologies. Mom, you can't do this. This is our future. You're destroying our family. I'm so sorry, Mom. Sarah was wrong. I was wrong. Please just talk to me. I listened to them once, then deleted them. His apologies were 10 years too late and millions of dollars short. Sarah, for her part, tried a different tactic. She sent me a long, rambling email full of excuses and accusations. She claimed I had misunderstood her email. She said I had always been jealous of her relationship with Mark. She accused me of being a manipulative old woman who used money to control people. It was so full of lies and projections that it was almost laughable. I printed it out and filed it away with my other evidence. I did not reply. My friend Carol called, having heard the story from Susan. You did it, she said, her voice full of admiration. You actually did it. How do you feel? I feel free, I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. I feel sad, but I feel free. Sad is okay, she said. You're grieving the son you thought you had. But free is better. Now you get to live your life for you. The following week, I had my appointment with my lawyer. I brought my amended will, and we sat down together to draft a new, ironclad version. We created the Lily and Tom Legacy Trust. I named Susan as the primary trustee, with my lawyer as a secondary. The terms were clear. The money was to be used for their health, education, and well-being. They would gain full access to the principal when they turned 30. Mark and Sarah were explicitly forbidden from having any control over or access to the funds. My lawyer looked at me after we had finished. "This is a very powerful document, Helen," he said. "Are you absolutely sure this is what you want?" I looked at him without a moment's hesitation. "I am more sure of this than I have been of anything in a very long time," I said. The fallout continued to ripple through the family. I received a call from Sarah's mother. I expected her to defend her daughter, to yell at me. Instead, she was quiet and apologetic. "Helen," she said, her voice heavy, "I heard what happened. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I don't know what's gotten into Sarah. That is not how I raised her. To be so disrespectful. So cruel. Thank you for saying that," I said, genuinely touched. "It means a lot to hear. She's always been ambitious," her mother continued, as if thinking aloud.
She wanted a certain kind of life.
"I think she saw Mark and you as a way to get it. I am just so sorry she hurt you in the process. It was a small thing, that phone call, but it was a bomb on a raw wound. It was a confirmation that I was not the villain Sarah was trying to paint me as." A month after the picnic, I received a formal letter from a lawyer representing Mark and Sarah. They were contesting my amendment to the will, claiming I was not of sound mind and was being unduly influenced by my sister, Susan. My lawyer laughed when I read it to him over the phone.
"Let them try," he said.
"You are perfectly sound of mind, and the only person who is unduly influencing you is your daughter-in-law, with years of emotional and financial manipulation. We have your notebook. We have the email. We have witnesses from the picnic. They don't have a leg to stand on. This is a scare tactic. They're hoping you'll get frightened and give in." I wasn't frightened. I was angry. The audacity of it, to accuse me of being mentally incompetent after they were the ones who had driven me to such a drastic measure. "Tell them to proceed," I told my lawyer. "I am ready for a fight." The legal threats fizzled out a few weeks later. Their lawyer likely told them what a weak case they had. The silence that followed was more telling than any angry phone call. They knew they had lost. They had overplayed their hand, and now they had nothing. Life settled into a new normal. A quieter, more peaceful normal. I saw my sister Susan more often. We had lunch with Carol every week. I started volunteering at the local library, reading to children. I was rebuilding my life, not around the hollowed-out space my son had left, but around the people and activities that brought me genuine joy. The question of my grandchildren was a constant, dull ache in my heart. I missed them terribly. I knew Sarah would be poisoning their minds against me, telling them stories about their cruel grandmother who had cut them off. It was a pain I had to learn to live with. I had made the trust for them. I had secured their future. It was the last act of love I could offer them, even from a distance. I had to trust that one day, when they were old enough, they would understand. About a year after the picnic, I was at the grocery store when I saw him.
Mark.
He was alone, pushing a cart, looking tired and older than his years.
He saw me at the same time.
He froze. For a long moment, we just stared at each other across the aisle of cereal boxes. He looked like he wanted to say something. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. I saw a flicker of the little boy I had raised, the boy who used to run to me for comfort. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the face of a man who had made his choice. A man who had stood by and watched his mother be humiliated. I gave him a small, polite nod, the kind you give a stranger. Then I turned and pushed my cart away. I did not look back. I had nothing left to say to him. The legal battle they had threatened never materialized. Instead, a few months later, I heard through the family grapevine that they had put their large house on the market. Without my financial support, they could no longer afford the mortgage and the lifestyle that went with it. They moved into a smaller rental townhouse on the other side of the state. I felt a brief, sharp pang of something that might have been satisfaction, but it was quickly replaced by a familiar sadness. This was the outcome of their choices, not my victory. They had built their life on a foundation of my money and their lies, and without either, it had all crumbled. Life went on.
The seasons changed.
I hosted Christmas dinner at my house again. It was a smaller affair, just me, Susan and her husband, and Carol. It was quiet, peaceful, and full of genuine warmth. We shared stories about David, we laughed, and for the first time in years, I felt the true spirit of Christmas in my home again. There was no tension, no walking on eggshells, no feeling like an unwanted guest. I was the head of my own table in my own home, surrounded by people who loved and respected me. It was enough. One afternoon, about 2 years after the picnic, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was shaky and unfamiliar. It was from Lily. She was older now, a teenager. I opened it with trembling hands. "Dear Grandma," it read. I found her address from Aunt Susan. "Mom and Dad don't know I'm writing this. I miss you. I know they say you did something bad, but I don't believe them. I remember you were always nice to me. You read me stories and you made the best apple pie. I hope you are okay. Love, Lily." Tucked inside was a recent school picture. She was beautiful, with my eyes and David's smile. I held the letter to my chest and cried. They were not tears of sadness or relief. They were tears of hope. The seeds of love I had planted so long ago had not been completely uprooted. A tiny sprout was pushing its way through the poisoned soil. I wrote back to her immediately. I didn't mention her parents. I didn't talk about the money or the will. I just told her that I missed her too, more than words could say. I told her I thought of her and Tom every day. I told her about the volunteer work I was doing at the library. I told her I still had the recipe for her favorite apple pie, and I would make it for her any time she wanted. I sent the letter to Susan's house, asking her to pass it along. A quiet correspondence began between me and my granddaughter, a secret bridge built between our two worlds. It was a fragile connection, but it was real. It was a promise of a future I thought I had lost forever. Looking back on that day at the picnic, I see it not as an ending, but as a beginning. It was the end of a long, painful chapter of my life, a chapter where I allowed my love for my son to blind me to the truth. But it was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I learned to love myself, to respect myself, and to fight for my own dignity. Sarah wanted to erase me, to make me small and insignificant. Instead, she gave me a gift. She gave me back my strength. She forced me to find my voice. I learned that true family is not about blood or obligation. It is about respect. It is about kindness. It is about showing up for each other, not just with an open hand, but with an open heart. The will still sits in my safe deposit box, a stark reminder of the day I chose myself. The trust for Lily and Tom is growing, a silent testament to a grandmother's enduring love. I no longer wait for apologies that will never come. I no longer mourn the son I lost. I am moving forward, my head held high, surrounded by a small but strong circle of people who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. Sarah thought she was kicking me out of her family. She never realized I was the one who held the key to the foundation all along. She wanted me to be small. Now she knows what it feels like to be written out of the story entirely.